All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to roll right into chapter 4 on socialization. Really, we're going to talk about nature versus nurture, or nature and nurture from sociological perspectives, and really look at just how important socializing with other human beings is to our development. I mean, that's one of our questions. How important is it to have others around us? If you've ever gone through a time when you're used to tons of people, maybe this last year, and then you're not hanging out with tons of people, what's that like when you shift gears? And then what do you really need as a person? All right, so let's ask a question. Whoa, that dog looks like it wants that cupcake bad. Who was the most influential person in your life growing up? Now, I ask this question, and oftentimes, it really does come down to mother, father, sibling, grandparent. There are other answers outside of our family units, but a lot of times that's our answer. Most influential person somehow related to us and there since the very beginning or very early on in our lives. All right. So to you, which of the following is more important in influencing, or do you think is important in influencing your personality and behaviors? Biological factors, learning, friends and family, work, or all of the above? All right, yeah, we rely on a lot of different things as far as becoming who we are today. So one of the things that we ask as a sociologist is, who are you? And how did you get to be the person that you are today? I mean, all the little things that you like or dislike. Maybe some of you, I use this as an example, can't stand to listen to other people chew. That's a thing. That's an actual thing. That was my dad's thing, certainly my thing. I mean, how do the little things that impact you influence your personality development, and then also the big things or big people or big influences as well? So same thing as the beginning of every chapter. Let's ask some questions. Why is social experience key to human personality? What familiar social settings have special importance on how we live and grow? Because there are certainly some agents of socialization that we'll talk about that have profound impacts on who we end up being. How do our experiences change over the life course? How about this one? How did I make the friends that I have? How did my parents discipline me or not? Who raised me? And how did that change or impact my life? So a lot of basic questions. We could also say, who are you? Who's your best friend? Why? Why is that person your best friend? What do they understand about you, or how do they interact with you that makes that the case? All right. There I am as a little baby, and there I am older. No. That's Storm. That's my firstborn when he was little, and this is, I guess, child abuse, because we dressed him up in a Chicago Bears outfit. He's a Bears fan, but that's punishment sometimes. Not so much for me. I got to do the Super Bowl shuffle. Anyway, looking at yourself from within or without, are you the same person now as when you were a kid? I mean, just think about it. Maybe when you were 5 years old. How is that different from when you're 18 or 20 or 30 or whatever that might be? So how are you the same, and how are you different? Like if I'm looking at that picture of me, something's obvious. Nah, I got more gray in my beard. Whatever, right? But there are ways that I am really the same person as when I was a kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And there are ways that I'm very, very different. All of us, however, maintain some of that. I think our initial answer might be like, oh, well, I'm very different. I'm older now and stuff. But a lot of us like the same things that we liked when we were little, have a lot of the same reactions to things. And of course, like I said before, some of those things, along with human experience, form our personality, and then end up being very different. So social experience is really the key to our humanity. Socialization, the lifelong process or experience by which people develop their human potential and learn culture. So we internalize culture, it influences and limits our choices, and socialization is really basic to human development. Like we must socialize and be social people to develop as much as we can or to our full potential. And certainly socialization constructs that sense of who we are and how we think and how we act as members of a particular culture. So socialization, the whole thing, from the time when we're really little, maybe even inside the womb, to first when we're born, and then all the way through wherever you're at right now. All right, moving right along. The key to our humanity, again, social experience, personality. So we use this term, but here's how we use it in a social way. So a person's fairly consistent patterns of acting, thinking, and feeling. And what I mean is fairly consistent because as sociologists, we know that just when you think that human beings are going to do this every single time, no, they do something totally different. So fairly consistent. And it's really built our personalities by internalizing our surroundings. Um, it's interesting because I think back to when before we got a house, my parents were living in these apartments. We live in these apartments. One of my best friends, Keisha, is an African American girl. She's a lawyer, pretty high powered lawyer in Chicago right now. We've maintained a friendship for many years. And she got mad at me one day and she pulled down her pants and mooned me and called me a honky. And I was like, what? Crying. And I went back home and I said, Dad, she showed me her butt and called me a honker. And my dad put his arm around me and he's like, that's not what she called you. And I remember then having a big conversation about race and race relations with my dad. And I'm from, just outside of Chicago, so a much more diverse area, I would say, than where I'm at right now in Colorado. And so we had a talk that made a huge impression on me. And, I've been doing race relations work for the last 25 years, did my own individualized interdisciplinary major, made a race relations major for my undergraduate because they didn't even have one at the school I went to. So it's interesting because we have to think about how we internalize our experiences. All of these social experiences that we have, whether it's now or whether it's when you were little or in between, they build our personality. So we need that social experience to learn culture and really to survive. And that brings us to this question, which is, can personality develop without social experience? And as sociologists, we know that the answer to that is no, right? What would we be like without human beings, without other humans? And evidence points really to that crucial role that social experience plays in forming our personality. And sometimes, unfortunately, in the textbook cover this, we find people that have been taken from square one and just maybe barely fed to be kept alive. No one's smiling at them. No one's talking with them. No one's communicating with them. They're locked in a basement. They're locked in an attic. And sometimes we find these folks. And when we find these folks and we try and unravel what's been going on, we find that people can sometimes recover from abuse and short-term isolation. But there is a point at which isolation in infancy causes permanent developmental damage. You're not fully going to learn language. You're not fully going to be able to understand and socialize people. I mean, like I said before, over 80% or around 80% of all of our communication is nonverbal. No one's giving you those signals, gestures, symbols, you name it, things that we've already talked about. So cognitive damage, developmental damage. Basically what this means is we need other people. Human beings need other human beings to interact with, to have a personality, to form a personality. So I just told you mine, but can you think of maybe a childhood experience or experiences that impacted your personality that's still part of you today, right? Write it down, think about it. How did it change you? How did it impact you? How did it form who you are now? And my story was just a little story from my childhood, but it has really led throughout my life to pursuing social injustice and really relating to race relations. How could people possibly discriminate against each other based off of something as insignificant, it would seem, as melanin in our skin? Interesting, all right? That stuck with me forever, but there's a lot of things that stuck with me forever. And so you can think of that and how that formed for you and who you are today. Maybe that's your parents always went camping, and so now you're a huge outdoor person. It came time to go to college. You didn't live in Colorado, but you had to get to someplace where you could be outside all the time, right? You understand what I'm talking about. Something that helped form who you are. All right. So I would ask in class, really, are you free? If we were in class right now, I'd go around, are you free? Are you free? Are you free? Free to do what? Do we have freedom to choose? Because to a certain degree, we've been programmed to believe that we can't be programmed. Matrix, right? But we do have certain freedoms. And of course, then we constrain that in ways, right? With social rules and norms and social control. So what are you free to do and choose to do? What are we not free to do and choose to do? All right, waka waka waka. That's right, Fozzie Bear. A lot of you might not even know who the Muppets are, but of course, Kermit the Frog drinking tea is one of the most famous memes we have. But that's none of my business. Which is more important for human behavior and development? Nature, right? Nurture, or neither? So biology, biological drives, just boom, you're born with all this. Nurture, right? Socialization, people around you being raised, or neither is more important. I mean, really, if we're going to look at it as sociologists, we know that nurture and nature are important, but sociologists believe and know that nurture is more important. So humans depend on others to provide care. Look, we wouldn't develop without other people. We need nurture, right? Physical growth, personality development, all of these cases of social isolation lead us to the fact that although biology and biological forces do make some difference, it's nurture and socialization that make the greatest impact for human development. And I think that there are truly some dangers, some hangups, some things that we want to avoid explaining things, right? The role of nature or through biological science. Now, Darwin kind of was honing in on this idea that behavior was instinctive, right? It's our nature. And so people really, I think, took what Darwin was saying and changed that around so that we can say it's these biological drives. And therefore, our US economic system reflects our instinctive human competitiveness, right? Or people are born criminals and we can look at how their face looks, what their makeup is, what their race is, and we know that those people are born criminals, and therefore, right out of the gate, no. And of course, then we use that to select or justify other things too, not only racism, but sexism, saying men are naturally more rational and women are naturally more emotional. But I'm not sure if that bears any resemblance to reality. Sometimes I am not at all rational, and I am certainly very, very, very emotional. So using biological science to explain that role of nature is overdone and can lead us down really a dark tunnel, right? What damage could or can be caused by explaining cultural diversity with a nature analysis? Well, we know people who were not science or scientists tried to explain things, and they came up with an idea or concept of race science. I'm going to have you do that again, science, because it was not science at all. It was done oftentimes by people that had degrees and doctorates, and they worked at major universities and institutions, but the work that they were doing truly bears zero resemblance to science whatsoever. And that is that inherent danger of trying to say, you are this by nature. Nature determines that. We know that's not true as sociologists, but like I said before in a previous chapter, if it manifests itself into real consequences, then even things like racism and discrimination that lie on platforms of non-reality and bias can have very real impacts. And today, we are still, people of color are still, women are still, people who are non-dominant in society still suffering from major, major statistical inequalities caused by folks generations ago. So let's get into this briefly. So the biological science, the role of nature. People trying to understand cultural diversity also misunderstood Darwin. Like I said, they applied Darwin's idea in a way that wasn't really what Darwin was trying to get across. So European explorers linked cultural differences to biology and then formed a false sort of race science. And of course, they viewed members of less technological societies as less evolved, more primitive, right? And then therefore less human. And we can get into the dynamics of this briefly. We will in the race chapter, but we'll talk about inequality every chapter. Really, it's kind of mind-boggling how people of European descent could form something and then fool themselves and then teach others to believe in those lies, that these people are not equally as human as people of European descent. Now, of course, once you do that, then that ethnocentric view really helps you do things like colonization. Okay? And we're still colonizing the globes with dominant Eurocentric, ethnocentric forms of incorrect thinking, really. And it's still used to oppress categories of people today. Now, it's really interesting because I want to talk about John B. Watson and the social sciences. And this is, look at the time when he lived, 1878 to 1958. So we're talking about a time when, pre-civil rights movement as we know it, very little, if any, women's rights, children's rights, you name it. Unless you are a member of dominant culture, you're getting a massively unequal or massively disproportionate share of the goods in society, whereas other folks, non-dominant folks, are getting the bads more often. And so he's saying that behavior is not instinctive, but it's learned. So instead of saying it's science, right, he's looking right at a psychological perspective that's looking at rewards and punishment, and both animal and human behavior can be learned, right, not just instinctive. So he's saying if we look at reward and punishment, we know that people actually are equally human, just culturally different, because they have learned different cultural patterns. It's not that these people are subhumans or primitives or less evolved. They're just different, right? Because they have learned a different set of cultural rules and norms and values. So Watson is saying that human behavior is rooted in nurture, not nature. Now, that wouldn't be radical or mind-blowing if it wasn't for the fact that you look at when he was alive. I mean, 1870 to 1958, doing most of his work before the 1930s and 40s, still doing some work then, but really a time when people of color, no rights, women, very few rights. And so this is radical, and it's awesome, and it's mind-blowing in the framework of the race science that was taking society down the other sort of path, right? So nurture matters more to sociologists in shaping human behavior. It's rooted in nurture and not nature. And I guess one way to say it is nurture is our nature. So for long before that, we're still arguing, and still today, that with great effort, that many people are just less human, right? Less than human. Many, many, many famous, influential politicians are on video talking about the role of biology and athletics, and why some people are smarter and certain races are more athletic and not as smart, and some people deserve to be ruling. Look, that's all based and built on a foundation of inequality and lies. Everyone is equally human. I guess my question would be, and the thing that keeps popping up in my head would be, why did it take so long for people of European descent to recognize people from other cultures as actual people? All right, you don't have to copy this down, but this is Watson in 1930. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one of them and become a lawyer, a doctor, an artist, a merchant, and even a beggar, man, or thief. And yes, right, regardless of talents, pensions, tendencies, abilities, because even though he says I'm going beyond my facts, but so do the advocates of the contrary, they have no proof. He's like, I really do believe that this is what's going on with people. It is not nature, but it is how we learn and the environments that people are in. I bet you won't share this because you're too embarrassed to have Jesus on your wall. Wait, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Wait a second. All right, let's get to meat, and we'll get to meat in the theory of self next time. A little bit of race science today, a little bit of socialization basis. So let's do it. Be good people and do good things.